Hello, everyone. We have about 900 people registered for this call, so we are going to give it a moment for folks to have time to log in, and we will get started in just a moment. So hang with us. People are still logging onto the call, so we'll give it another moment before we get started. We'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. My name is Paul Keeley. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I want to welcome you to today's National HoUSed campaign call. We have a great call today. We have with us HUD Senior Advisor for Housing and Services, Richard Cho, who will be providing an update on new funding to address homelessness in the American Rescue Plan Act. We'll also hear about a new report about prioritizing emergency rental assistance to ensure funds reach the lowest income and most marginalized people. We'll hear about a campaign to ensure COVID-19 stimulus payments reach all low-income households throughout the United States. We'll get updates on advancing the HOUSE campaign's priorities for universal, stable, and affordable homes for all who are eligible. We'll hear the latest from Capitol Hill and from the field and more. So we're really excited. Please do me a favor, and if you have questions for any of the speakers, please enter those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and save the chat for really just chatting with others on the call, sharing information. We'll share links and so forth. But if you have a question for one of the presenters, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. I'll tend to focus there. Okay, so we will get started now, and it is a real pleasure to introduce HUD Senior Advisor for Housing and Services and former CEO of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, Richard Cho. Thank you for joining us, Richard.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you all for inviting me to join your call today. I'm really here just to give an update on two of the resources that HUD has the opportunity to provide as a result of the American Rescue Plan that are specifically intended to address homelessness. Let me start by just saying that Secretary Fudge has spoken about this in numerous kind of interviews and in media that, you know, for her, addressing homelessness is a top priority. She's aware that over the last year, while many of us were asked to stay safe by staying home due to COVID-19, that there were more than 580,000 Americans on any given night who had no ability to do so because they had no home. She also is aware that, as many of us have been now getting access to COVID-19 vaccines, and many of us have had side effects and results that are challenging. Second doses in many cases have made people had to suffer. She thinks about how a person who's experiencing homelessness, whereas many of us can lay in our beds, maybe take the afternoon off after receiving our second dose if we're not feeling well. There's more than 500,000 Americans who, if they're fortunate enough to get vaccines at an early stage, they may be suffering side effects, but have to do so in a tent or in a crowded shelter. And so for her, the American Rescue Plan resources for addressing homelessness are really about how do we address what is an urgent crisis, that there are more than 500,000 Americans on any given night, probably many more over the course of the year, who have to suffer the worst during COVID-19. So there's two specific opportunities we have. One of those is the home resources. So I call these home investment partnerships program dollars. It's formally where the money lives within HUD. These were funds, however, that were really intended to provide grants to help communities address homelessness. And while there's quite a bit of flexible uses, they can be used to provide fund services. They can also be used to provide short-term tenant-based rental assistance. We are hoping that the majority of these funds will be used to help communities add more affordable and supportive housing to their existing inventory. Because we know that we can only get so far with reducing homelessness simply by leasing, and that's where the vouchers come into place. We do need to add more to the inventory. So the first set of resources that HUD has awarded was $5 billion in what we call home ARP dollars. And we did make those allocations a few weeks ago and let communities know what their dollars are. We're working very quickly to try to provide the guidance formally on how communities can use those resources. We have some internal and challenges that have to do with statute that we have to work through in order to get that guidance out. But meanwhile, we'll be continuing to provide technical assistance and other technical assistance documents that will help communities understand what can be done through the home ARP dollars. In a couple of weeks, we'll be announcing the allocations of the emergency housing vouchers, which is the second part of the American Rescue Plan. In a way, it's the second part in the sequence of how we're issuing them, these resources, given the timeline that were set in the American Rescue Plan statute. But in a way, these are the resources that we have in the near term to address homelessness. So $5 billion in emergency housing vouchers that will be awarded to public housing authorities across the country. Those vouchers we are looking to ensure are prioritized for the specific populations that they're intended for: people who are currently experiencing homelessness, people who are also at risk of homelessness, people who are fleeing domestic violence. Those are the priority populations. And we'll be putting out the voucher allocations along with guidance more specifically. So I'm not at liberty to provide any of the details on that guidance, but you can be sure that these will be funds that will provide Section 8 housing choice voucher-like assistance to address homelessness. It's fairly significant in terms of how these resources work. I'm happy to answer some questions about those vouchers. What those two kind of funding streams provide us is an opportunity to do two things. In the near term, to use these vouchers, coordinated with other resources to provide supportive services to help move people immediately from the streets and from shelters and other places not meant for human habitation into housing that we can find in the private market and rent, and to subsidize those rents. That's the impact we can have. Between 50 to 70,000 people, I think, could be moved out from off the streets and out of shelters into permanent housing using those vouchers, as well as adding about 32,000 new units of affordable and supportive housing into the pipeline using the home ARP dollars. That also includes opportunities to purchase hotels that have been used to provide non-congregate shelter that could be converted to permanent housing. We've also heard of communities getting ready by identifying other rental properties that have been already in development, but where because of local dynamics in the rental market, many private owners are saying and developers are saying, we actually would love to sell these properties to be used as housing for people experiencing homelessness. Communities also looking at creative things like looking at their low-income housing tax credit pipeline and determining if these home dollars can be used to secure set-asides within existing low-income housing projects that are already in development. So many ways that communities can use these funds to add to the stock of affordable and supportive housing that can be used. Again, I mentioned some of these home dollars can also be used to provide tenant-based rental assistance. If communities want to use that as a bridge subsidy while helping find, align these vouchers and apply for vouchers, that's something that can be done. Communities also have some emergency solutions grant funds left over from the CARES Act, and if those funds are available, those can also be used to provide short-term rental assistance to bridge to a voucher, or frankly, to provide rapid rehousing if people don't need long-term rental assistance, but can be exited to out of homelessness using short-term rental assistance. ESG dollars and some of the home dollars can also be used to provide supportive services on a time-limited basis, so that as people are moving into units with emergency vouchers, we can also use ESG CV or home ARP dollars to provide some short-term rental assistance. And then I'll also just mention, there's opportunities both through community health centers that have received about $6 billion in flexible money for COVID response. One of the eligible uses of those $6 billion that community health centers, federally qualified health centers have received is to be able to provide housing navigation services, community health workers that can actually help people to stabilize in their homes and connect to healthcare. And then again, there's opportunities to work with your state's Medicaid programs to ensure that we can provide wraparound services through Medicaid funded services so that the housing can be paired with supportive services. So again, exciting opportunities, quite a bit at stake here. But I'll just say in the near term, we are really hoping that communities are able to use both these emergency vouchers and home ARP dollars quickly and strategically to bring down kind of a near-term reduction in the number of people experiencing homelessness, so that, again, when COVID arrived in our state, in our country in early 2020, in March of 2020, our homeless system was already, on the rise, and our homeless shelters were not in any position to be able to withstand a public health emergency. We have the opportunity to get to a place where fewer people are in congregate shelters, fewer people on the streets. And while these resources may not fully solve homelessness, we can make a significant dent in those resources. So Paul, I'll leave it there, and happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, great. There were a lot of questions. There are a number of questions that were submitted before the call, and there are lots of questions that are coming in now. We won't have time to address all of them. I'll just let the audience know that because your time is limited, and we also have a very packed call today. But there are a couple that I'll just get to. One from before the call was, how many people does HUD estimate will receive housing assistance through these new resources? And in a way, I think you kind of address that by saying 50 to 70,000 people should benefit from vouchers. And you're also hoping that you'll have 32,000 units constructed or put online, let's put it. Is that correct? Do I have that accurate?
Yeah, that's right in terms of the vouchers and the home dollars in terms of capital. Again, if home is used as tenant-based rental assistance, if you factor in the role of ESG CV, we're talking about 70,000 people housed through vouchers, potentially additional through rapid rehousing and short-term rental assistance, and then again, 32,000 units of new housing that could be built. Again, those are kind of back out the envelope estimates and assumptions because the goal really here is to leverage additional funds with home ARP in particular. If home can be used to leverage additional capital, stretches the dollars further, we can actually build potentially more units. So a lot depends on that, but that's the sort of kind of rough minimum of what we're hoping for is at least 70,000 people housed with vouchers, potentially some more with home used as tenant-based rental assistance. And then the vast majority of home that we hope will be used as capital will build 32,000 new units of affordable or supportive housing.
Outstanding. Desperately needed. Kind of a combo question is here is, when do you expect communities will actually see the voucher and home funds start to flow? And second, any idea of the time frame for when we can expect some guidance to come out on these programs?
Yeah, so we announced the home allocations a couple of weeks ago. Again, I'm working through some things internally related to the guidance. And then communities will have to develop a plan and get a plan approved before they'll continue to deploy those home resources. Working as fast as we can, definitely some kind of legal and other challenges that we're just working through. So hoping to get that out soon. The vouchers will be announced in early May. So within the next 2 weeks. That's no mystery. That's just actually what was laid out in the statute itself as a requirement. So the housing authorities eligible to receive those vouchers will hear about their the maximum allocations that they can receive in early May. And then that should happen. Their ability to receive those vouchers will happen very soon after that.
Great. Is there any room for state and local advocates to work with their states or localities to implement these new resources to ensure they're distributed equitably? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I mean, this is Paul, this is exactly the challenge that we all need to work on together, which is we're giving homelessness dollars that usually go to the continuums of care. And now we're providing vouchers through housing authorities and home dollars to jurisdictions and states that typically receive those funds. And so the name of the game is going to be collaboration. It's going to be really key for all the entities, governors, mayors, county leaders, to convene housing authorities, continuums of care, homeless service organizations, and develop a kind of strategy together on how to use these resources to, again, house as many people as we can in the near term, build new units of affordable and supportive housing to address homelessness that will assist in the next year and the years to come. So that's really the name of the game is how do we pull together all the people locally. And I think, I know lots of communities are already rallying around and putting together, even without having guidance from HUD on how to pull that collaboration together. But yes, I would say, get around the table with your mayors and governors who are receiving home dollars, engage your housing authorities now, and engage them around both the incredible opportunity we have, but also the urgency, and help them understand how, over the last year, who suffered really intensely during the pandemic. It's people who had no place to stay home, stay safe by staying home, and people who had to endure illness and face risk of COVID-19 in some of the worst circumstances.
Great. Can you tell us how long the voucher assistance is going to run?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of the quirky thing about these emergency vouchers. They were provided to us as a kind of lump sum as opposed to money that we knew would be renewed year after year. Typically, when we receive more money for vouchers, it gets added to HUD's tenant-based rental assistance baseline. So that means the actual overall account growth. In this case, they just gave us a lump sum of $5 billion and said, fund at a minimum 50,000 vouchers. We will likely be erring on the side of being more aggressive and funding more vouchers. What that means is at some point we'll run out of funds. If you fund 50,000 vouchers, roughly it lasts till 2030. If you fund slightly more, the timeline ends a little bit sooner. I'll just note that while that's certainly scary, if we put out 70,000 vouchers that last until 2027, 2028, then there may be a cliff that some of you are worried about. I'll just note it is our administration's priority to try to scale rental assistance and ensure that every American who is eligible for housing choice vouchers receives that level of rental assistance. We will be continuing to ensure that there is not a cliff that people have to face, but that these vouchers will be something that people can rely on an ongoing way.
Great, Richard. So here's another question. Will PHCs be required to work with continuums of care to fill the emergency vouchers to ensure they go to the most vulnerable?
So I'm not allowed to sort of speak about the details of some of the requirements that we're making, but I'll just let me say it this way: having housing authorities and continuums of care partner has been a priority at HUD for many years. And something that we think these vouchers really creates an opportunity to strengthen. And again, I think where we've seen strong PHA collaborations with homeless service organizations and continuums of care, we've seen tremendous progress. So I'll just leave it there, Paul, and say it is something that we definitely are hoping we'll see.
Great. There were several questions from folks before the call and during the call about working with continuums of care. I will just say, Richard, that your presentation here has generated a boatload of questions. So we'll compile these and share them with you, because I think they could, help inform what you're working on, and also, maybe you can get back to us with some questions we could share with the broader group. I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, as always. These resources are invaluable, as you know, and obviously communities are rare to get going with this. So anything that HUD can do to expedite the process would be most appreciated. But I want to just thank you again for being on today's call.
Thank you so much, Paul. Our ability to make the progress we want to see on homelessness is going to be only possible if we do it in partnership with communities. So having conversations like this is really key. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Richard. Take care. Okay, I do want to thank everybody for the many questions and comments that came in during that session. Again, we will compile them and share them and see if we can get responses to a number of your questions. They are invaluable to us as we put together FAQs and other documents that are available on our website, and for communicating with HUD. So thank you for all of your engagement during that first conversation. Okay, we are going to hear about a new report called Prioritization and Emergency Rental Assistance Programs, a framework of strategies, policies, and procedures to better serve priority populations, put together as a collaboration between the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the Center for Law and Social Policy class. And we have with us today Jesse Russell, research analyst at the CLASP, and Rebecca Ye, who's at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So I will turn it over to Rebecca and Jesse. I see Jesse.
Yes, hey everybody. I'm super excited to be here with you guys today. My name is Jesse, as Paul mentioned. I use they, them pronouns, and I work as a research assistant at the Center for Law and Social Policy. So we want to begin our presentation with some acknowledgements. This report is based on research and outreach conducted by NLIHC and CLASP. We also analyzed NLIHC's joint research with the Housing Initiative at Penn and NYU Furman. And I just want to give a special shout out to the report entitled Advancing Racial Equity in Emergency Rental Assistance Programs, which mentions prioritization as a key strategy. I'm sure the link will be dropped in the chat at some point during our presentation. The report was also informed by ongoing research NLIHC has conducted on ERA programs and from NLIHC's regular working group calls, where program administrators have shared their wisdom and insight into challenges that they've faced while trying to prioritize applicants. That information has just been unmatched. We really needed that in order to get these examples beefed out in the report. So as many of you all know, the COVID-19 relief package that was signed into law in December 2020 included $25 billion in assistance for tenants with low incomes and established the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, commonly referred to with the acronym ERA, administered by the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The American Rescue Plan Act, which was enacted in March, provides an additional $21 billion for a grand total of around $46 billion. So in addition to the eligibility requirements, the statute adds that administering entities must prioritize households with incomes below 50% of area median income, AMI, or with members who have been unemployed for 90 days or more. Programs can also incorporate additional criteria to prioritize applicants, and this is totally up to the discretion of the administering entity, as long as there are no restrictions written into state statutes. But despite these prioritization requirements, neither the statute nor guidance from the Treasury Department has explained how programs might implement strategies, policies, or procedures to prioritize outreach to or applications from a certain population, whether that be all households below 50% AMI as written into federal law, or another population that program designers have decided should receive priority. So on a much more technical level, this report aims to outline ways in which administrators can meet the statute's prioritization requirements as well as embed racial equity at every stage of the program administration. So I feel like it's important to note here that these state and local programs, like so many other benefits programs that are funded flatly through block grants, are forced to operate from a scarcity mindset. Everybody who's behind on rent right now deserves rent relief, full stop. I don't think that's anything that we want to debate in this report or in general, right? So while I caution against folks who read this report taking away from it that admin should create some hierarchy of need, myself and the other authors do view prioritization as a necessary component of equitable program design, especially when administrators are operating with limited funds. The people responsible for distributing much needed assistance to tenants and their landlords must consider the disparate impact of COVID-19 and its accompanying economic fallout on the same groups who are and have historically been more likely to face eviction or homelessness because of racist housing and land use policies. Nationally, those groups are Black, Latinx, single parent, transgendered, and/or immigrant renters, as well as those with a criminal record. But different populations have been disproportionately harmed by exclusionary policies in different parts of the US. So local context down to the census tract and the neighborhood level matters so much when designing these programs. You'll see once you read the report that there's a real emphasis on data disaggregated by geography. And you can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So the first section of the report delves further into how to determine the priority populations within a specific jurisdiction by using publicly available data, conducting historical analyses, and partnering with and paying community members who are directly impacted. Once the priority populations have been determined, administrators can then develop strategies, policies, and procedures that will increase the number of people within those groups who both apply for and receive financial assistance. And last thing before I hand it off to my colleague Rebecca to talk a little bit more about the remaining components of the report, we want to acknowledge that administrators are under immense pressure to get this money out fast. So we hope that this report offers resources and examples that admin can quickly adapt and operationalize without having to sacrifice speed for intentionality or vice versa. And with that, Rebecca, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Jesse. Next slide, please. So program administrators need to set goals and establish standards for accountability, such as benchmarks or performance metrics based on their priority population. Program goals are further reflected in the budget and whether or not funds adequately provide for the administrative capacity necessary to meeting the program's goals. The state of Washington's eviction rent assistance program intentionally prioritized Black, Native, and Indigenous and Latino communities in their program in two key ways. State program administrators held grantees accountable to key performance metrics on households of color served, specifically that the share of households served by the program must at least be proportional to the population of color living in poverty in each county. So, for example, the percent of Latino households served by the program in a particular county must be at least equal to the percent of Latino households living in poverty in that county. They also required that their local grantees subgrant at least 5% of their funds to community groups that are operated by and for the community they serve, so whose primary missions and histories are serving that specific community and are substantially controlled by individuals from that particular community as well. These community group subgrantees conducted significant outreach on behalf of the state's program, which leads me to my next point. Next slide, please. To reach priority populations, programs need to conduct robust tenant and landlord outreach by partnering with and investing in community groups that are substantially controlled by individuals from the communities they serve, leveraging existing systems such as local COCs or eviction courts, employing non-digital outreach strategies, and engaging landlords through education and negotiation. Next slide, please. Outreach needs to be coupled with intake support. Tenants and landlords alike may have limited digital literacy, low access to technology, or prefer non-English languages as their primary language. Intake support can bridge those gaps. To improve intake support, program administrators should consider, again, partnering with trusted organizations to help tenants and landlords complete their applications, offering applications in a multitude of languages, and providing different methods for applicants to complete applications online, over the phone, or on paper. Next slide. So up to this point, we've been talking more about how programs can increase the chance that the prioritized population makes it into the applicant pool. Programs can also maximize the chance that priority populations are selected to receive assistance, or the programs may vary the assistance based on whether or not the applicant is in the priority population. To increase the chance that people within the priority populations are selected to receive assistance, program administrators can use points-based systems where applications are assigned points based on a set of applicant characteristics, and applications with more points are served first or have higher priority. A variation on this is the weighted lottery, where applications with higher points have higher priority in the lottery or have several recurring lotteries devoted exclusively to applications within a certain point range. Programs can vary the duration of assistance as well to make sure that prioritized households receive adequate assistance to remain stably housed. So for example, the City of San Antonio's Emergency Housing Assistance Program allows applicants to receive 9 months of assistance if they have incomes below 50% of area median income, compared to 6 months of assistance if they have higher incomes. Next slide, please. Lastly, policies and programs designed with intentions to reach prioritized populations may not produce their intended results. So monitoring and evaluation are really essential to identifying areas for improvement in each step of the program model. Real-time evaluation allows programs to amplify the successful parts of their programming while adapting areas where challenges exist. Outcome evaluations are also really critical in the long term to identify shortfalls and successes to apply those lessons learned in future iterations of rental assistance programming. Next slide. So I wanted to revisit the diagram that we started with. We walked through various stages of program administration, including 1, determining the priority population, as Jesse talked about, 2, program budgeting and setting benchmarks, 3, conducting robust tenant and landlord outreach, 4, providing ample intake support for tenants and landlords, 5, selecting applications and providing services, and 6, monitoring and evaluation. While each of these may feel like discrete and separate steps, they all really feed into each other and actually form an iterative process where feedback, monitoring, and evaluation continually provide contemporaneous feedback on how program planning and implementation are going, and really serves as a jumping off point for program administrators to continue improving their programs. So with this, I will stop and open for questions.
Thank you very, very much, Rebecca and Jesse. So there is a question here just to ask, when you're talking about the point system, what is being used to dictate the point system is what Yesenia asked.
Yeah, great question. Whenever I think about any other stage in the process post or step 1, so determining the priority population, that's really where you're making all of those decisions of which characteristics and qualities you're going to prioritize. So most of that information in the report comes in the first section, determining the priority population, and you can use available data. You can also use historical analysis and a bunch of other stuff that you have at your disposal as an admin.
Great. There's another, just a point that was made by Andy Height. If delays prevent the monies from going out, the non-renewals will disproportionately impact the exact groups we need to serve, no? basically, I think he's making the point that we want to be sure that we have a balance between prioritization and getting the resources out the door expeditiously.
Absolutely. And I think one of the main things we're trying to convince and argue in the report is that the things can happen. Both can be true. You can be really intentional and also do things efficiently and quickly.
Yeah, I think that this is a, something that we've seen in a couple of instances is where programs are using some sort of geographical marker to help prioritize a little bit. That's kind of one common instance where we've seen that, where it can kind of, you get to prioritization without necessarily asking for more documents showing this or that for certain key program characteristics. So that's kind of one option. There are a number of I think that there are a number of different ways to go about it that are really going to be community specific.
Fantastic. So we're kind of tight on time, but there are a couple of additional questions and comments in the chat. If you guys could take a look at those, that would be great. And if you have a chance to respond to them, that would be fantastic. I will just say that one of the questions was, with emergency rental assistance, are people with disabilities on NLIHC's radar? That's absolutely the case. Please do check out this report. We really talk about that as one of the marginalized groups of people that should be considered and prioritized in emergency rental assistance programs. And I will just say that kudos to the CLASP researchers and to the NLIHC research staff. This report is just phenomenal. It's got lots of great, really concrete suggestions. I really suggest that you check it out and share it broadly in your states and localities. It's really, really helpful. Extremely well done. And yes, slides. People are asking about the slides being shared. We will share these slides after the call today. So we're going to move on. Thank you very much. And NLIHC is tracking emergency rental assistance programs around the country. And we're going to try to give regular updates on that tracking here, brief updates each Monday. So I have the pleasure of introducing Neetu Nair, research analyst at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, to give the latest updates on emergency rental assistance. Neetu?
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the call today. I'm going to just quickly run through where we are on the latest updates with the emergency rental assistance programs. We continue to track these programs created in response to COVID-19 and expand our database, which we began developing last year. And this phase on tracking includes the $25 billion in rental assistance dollars allocated under the Consolidated Appropriations Act of late last year. And as of today, our database includes nearly 900 programs, 260 of which are from the Treasury ERA program. And we know that a total of 691 total jurisdictions receive direct allocations from Treasury, and we will be monitoring these closely and updating our database as and when these programs open. Next slide, please. So here are some updates on where we currently stand. Like I mentioned, we have 260 programs in the database that are from Treasury emergency rental assistance programs, which represent over 323 different jurisdictions. This difference is because several programs have combined their direct allocations between cities and counties or joined the state programs and consolidated under one umbrella program. And so nearly 70% of the states, cities, and counties that receive direct allocations from Treasury are now represented in our database. So this roughly includes 44 states, 210 cities and counties, and 6 territory or tribal government programs, with more to be added in the coming weeks. And 87% of the programs in our database are currently accepting applications. So we have around 228 programs that are open for applications, with 41 state programs that are currently, again, open for applications. And we continue to track and update these 3 times a week, where we update all of the public-facing information available on our website. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of direct allocation, in terms of the initial observations, we're seeing that self-attestation still continues to be low with programs. Only 28% of the programs explicitly stating that they've allowed for a self-certification of documentation. There might be some that we can't see evidently without accessing the applications, but from what we have recorded, we see that most housing instability options remain low, whereas self-attestation for income and COVID hardship are more commonly allowed for. In terms of direct to tenant options, only 45 programs, so that's 17% of the programs that we have recorded, explicitly state that they will be allowing direct to tenant options in the case landlords refuse to participate in the program. And with ERA funds primarily paid to landlords, landlord participation remains critical to keeping renters stably housed. And several program administrators have reported difficulties in actually engaging landlords in these programs. However, the direct to tenant options continue to remain low. And these trends will continue to be monitored as more programs open. We see programs are opening every week. So hopefully these trends continue to grow and continue to change. And all of these updates will continue to be available on the NLIHC website. And I'm going to end the presentation here, but I'm happy to answer questions that come up during the chat. And I invite my colleague Rebecca to help field some of the questions that come up as well.
Okay, I'm not actually seeing too many questions. One is if the website can be shared, and in fact it is public facing and is updated regularly. People are asking where, if they can track rental assistance programs in their areas. And again, if you check out the public facing website, you will find all of that. There are questions about specific locales. And again, I just suggest that you check out the public facing website and or send an email directly to Neetu and she can get back to you. But I think in part because we're very tight on time here, I'm going to also move along. We shared a link to the website and we'll make sure that we share that again, okay? Just so that everybody knows exactly where to go to get that. Neetu, thank you very, very much for that update.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to move on now to, I'm just checking my time because I know one of our presenters has to be off right at 3:30. I think we have time to get in according to our regular agenda, and we'll be able to meet that time frame. So we have with us now Jenny Huang from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities to talk to us a little bit about stimulus checks and the campaign to ensure that they reach low-income households. Jenny?
Thanks, Paul. And I will keep mine short. And if I'm hitting too close to the time, just you can feel free to cut me off.
Okay, great.
So I'm Jenny Huang. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities Get It Back campaign. So in regular non-pandemic times, we focus on outreach around the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, as well as free tax filing. So of course, during the pandemic, given that the stimulus check is a tax credit, we have shifted our attention to making sure that the stimulus checks reach the folks who need it the most, particularly non-filers and people who might be at risk of missing out because they don't file taxes or they don't. There's a lot of barriers around that. So In 2020, we really focused our outreach broadly on non-filers and making sure people were accessing the non-filer portal. This year it's a little different, right? So most people have received their stimulus checks already. So we're really thinking about the people who might still be missing out. Back in January of this year, the IRS shared that about 8 million people had not received their first stimulus check, right? And so with all three stimulus checks combined, that's about $3,200 on the line, which of course is a ton of money. So this year, right, we're really focused on the people who might be missing out. So we're thinking a lot about people who may lack stable housing, people who are immigrants. And so that's why I'm just so excited to be able to talk to you all who are reaching these communities. So one quick point I wanted to share about the eligibility around the stimulus check that has changed this with the third stimulus check is, so the first two stimulus checks, people could only, so if you had a couple who was married filing jointly and both people in the couple were ITIN holders, those people could not claim any dependents they had who had social security numbers. So they would be missing out on that money. So with the third stimulus check, that did change. So now, even if you and your spouse, if you're married filing jointly, do not have social security numbers, you can still claim the $1,400 stimulus check for any dependents you have, regardless of age. It doesn't have to be children, which does mean that 2.2 million children who were previously left out of payments with the first and the second stimulus check are now eligible, which is huge. It's huge. So some of the other hard to reach populations that we're focusing on are folks who have very low incomes, as I mentioned before, immigrants, people who lack secure housing, people who are incarcerated, and people without internet. So these are folks who are not usually required to file taxes. They may not know that they are eligible. And a lot of folks, especially people who lack secure housing, are missing important information in documents, like they may be missing their social security number or their social security cards, and may not have mailing addresses. So right now, we're thinking of the outreach in terms of different phases in time. So right now we're in phase 1 of outreach through May 17th, the filing deadline, where we're encouraging people to file taxes to get the third stimulus check, claim their first and second stimulus check as the recovery rebate credit. And also, this also lays the ground for claiming other tax credits, right? So we know that the child tax credit was expanded, and that will be hugely important for parents this year. And we want to make sure that people have filed their 2020 taxes and are ready to get the advanced child tax credit when that comes out. And if people have any questions about the CTC too, just like leave them in the Q&A or in the chat. I can, well, I can answer some of the questions. A lot we don't know around the CTC expansion. But anyway, after May 17th, through October 15th, we're going to continue encouraging people to file taxes, especially because there's really no penalty to filing your taxes late as long as you don't owe anything. So even though the tax deadline is May 17th, it's not a real deadline for a lot of people. October 15th is like the real deadline. So to support outreach efforts, we do have several resources available. In thinking about these resources, we were really thinking about how to focus on in-person outreach given the barriers that exist that I've mentioned already. And so the key messages around outreach that we wanted to emphasize, there's 4 of them. So 1, you may be eligible for up to 3 stimulus checks worth $3,200. We want to emphasize the dollar amount that people could be missing out on. 2, the importance of filing taxes, right? So filing taxes can help you claim them in other refunds, like the recently expanded child tax credit. So we want to lay the ground for receiving other benefits. And then 3, if this is, I think, one of the key messages for immigrants especially, is if anyone in your household has a social security number, file taxes by May 17th to get your money. So this message is really important just because there's just so many complicated rules around eligibility and how it works. And we don't want to inundate people with information, and really, like, especially for people in mixed status households, like, as long as even one person has a social security number, it is important to file. And then 4, reiterating that this will not have immigration related consequences, so it does not follow under the public charge rule. And then lastly, here's how you take action. So linking people to free tax filing resources. So in terms of what resources we have now, we have a ton of FAQs and resources on, like, eligibility and different questions that people have on our website, eitcoutreach.org. I'll leave that in the chat after I'm done talking. I really can't do 2 things at once. But we are about to launch a new outreach toolkit that does focus on reaching hard to reach populations. Thank you for leaving that in the chat. So the materials that we're coming out with are a media guide, talking points for the media, a press release template, sample media pitch, sample radio PSA script, and those are more for reaching out to media, of course, which we think is a great way to reach hard to reach populations. And then in addition to that, we also have resources for for individual outreach. So we have a sample flyer that is customizable and available in 6 languages, including English, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Vietnamese, and French. We have social media graphics that are also customizable, social media language, sample text messages, and a sample email. So with all of these, just thinking about the ways that you can reach out to folks in your community that are in person again. We also have a lot of FAQs, as I mentioned before, on the first, second, and third stimulus check, as well as the recovery rebate. Oh my gosh, I'm getting close to time. Just like one more short sentence, Paul, and then I'll stop. So the final thing I wanted to mention is one of the most important roles that you can play is to help people with the intake process in tax filing, because that is a place that we lose a lot of people. People really struggle with answering tax questions as well as collecting their documents. And so if you do want to support that, Code for America has a new program where you can help them with virtual tax filing. You don't actually have to do any tax filing yourself, but you can take a 3 to 4 hour training to help anyone that you can reach with the intake process. And that's one great way to help provide a service without actually filing taxes for folks. So super excited for any questions you have. If I can't get to them now, I will reach back out later. And yes, thank you for the time. Sorry for going over.
No, not at all, Jenny. Thank you so much for this really valuable information and for all you're doing to ensure that everybody gets the stimulus checks that they're owed. There are a number of questions due to time. I'm going to have to move on in the agenda, but if you could take a look at the questions that came in the Q&A box and address those, that would be great. I just really want to thank you again, but we do have another presenter who's got to leave right at 3:30, so I'm going to move on to that now. Thank you, Jenny. Okay, so Gregory Hiller, Executive Director at the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority, will speak to us now. Greg?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can, thanks.
All right, great. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about our new rent assistance program. Just as a little bit of backup, we launched our first program back in May 2020. We did 3 rounds of rent assistance prior to the Appropriations Act, where we distributed over $65 million to over 14,000 households. Our third round of assistance, where we distributed about $24 million, was directly to tenants without their landlord's involvement. The reason we did that was because in the rounds before that, about 35% of landlords either didn't respond or didn't participate. And we thought it was important to get money directly into the hands of tenants who needed it. So in our current round, between what we have in the Appropriations Act, which is about $104 million, and what we're anticipating from the rescue plan, we launched our new program on April 1st. We give the opportunity for landlords or tenants to initiate the application. We do make payments directly to tenants if the landlord is non-responsive or refuses the funds. We do allow for self-certification. Currently, we've gotten about 17,200 applications, and we're making our first payments later this week. So that's the short. Oh, and some demographics. 97% of our applicants are under 50% AMI, 86% are under 30% AMI, about 71% are people of color. So I'll stop there. I know you have other presenters, and happy to take any questions.
Greg, that is just fantastic. Just wonderful to hear what you guys are doing in terms of direct tenants and self-certification or attestation. Those numbers about who you're targeting and who's being served are just phenomenal. And I just would really encourage, I mean, this relates back to what we were talking about earlier about, you know, making sure programs can make sure that the funds get to those most in need. Just outstanding.
I just want to say one more quick thing. The Urban Institute put out this great tool where you can look at, based on their algorithm, where they think rent assistance should be targeted. And so we did a scatter map or a heat map of our rent assistance that was actually put out there at our applications and compared it to Urban Institute's. And we're now doing door-to-door, on the ground outreach to areas where we were a little light. We're getting billboards in those neighborhoods. So we actually are pivoting real time to try and respond based on Urban Institute's tool. So I just want to thank them again, as I've done over social media in the past, and encourage everybody to look at that and to pivot as quickly as you can to respond to those high need areas.
Great. There are just a couple of things here. Again, I know your time is very tight, but if you have a moment, do you get a certification from the tenant that funds will be used specifically for rent if the landlord refuses to participate and the funds go directly to the tenant?
We do have the tenant sign an affidavit that says that the funds will be used for their housing costs. I have to look at the exact language that we ended up putting together.
Great, great. And then how many applications did you receive?
In this current round, since we opened on April 1st, we've gotten a little over 17,200.
Great, great. And if people want to learn more, is there a place to go on your website where you describe the program, and or can they reach out to you by email?
Yeah, the website's phlrentassist.org, and I'll put my email into the chat over here.
And it's also on the screen as well.
Oh yeah, good. That's a good point.
Gregory, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's an example of what can and should be done. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Take care. Okay, we'll go now to our next field update. And I believe our presenter is going to be Alexa Bertinelli from the Civil Justice Inc. in Maryland. I have another name appearing here. There were 3 people from the organization, but I think that Alexa is going to be the one speaking. Is that correct, Alexa?
That's correct.
Okay, great.
Hello, everyone. My name's Alexa Bertinelli, and I am the managing attorney at Civil Justice. We are a small Maryland nonprofit that's based in Baltimore City. And in addition to our in-house staff, we have a network of approximately 100 private attorneys who are solo and small firm practitioners who have committed to providing affordable representation to Marylanders of low and moderate income. And so I'm here today to talk about a new project that we just launched called the Renter Eviction Avoidance Project, in which we're representing tenants who are residing in public housing that's operated by the Housing Authority for the City of Annapolis. And so according to the Housing Authority, somewhere between 250 to 300 of their 790 public housing families are currently delinquent on rent and at risk of eviction. That means that more than a third of their tenants are at risk of eviction. We think that this number is pretty staggering, given that this is a public housing property and the rent should be affordable for the tenants who are residing there. And so our project is funded by the Arundel Community Development Services. And so along with ACDS and other community partners, we've really tried to implement a multi-pronged approach to tackle this issue. The main focus of our role is on legal representation. And so after we do an initial tenant intake and preliminary review of the tenant's housing authority file, we then assign the tenants to one of our private panel attorneys and pay the attorney a modest stipend to represent the tenant in negotiations with the housing authority over the balance, potentially a negotiation for an affordable payment plan if that's appropriate, as well as representation in court if an eviction action is filed. Many of our private attorneys have general landlord-tenant knowledge, but are new to public housing, and so we've also organized a number of mandatory trainings on representing tenants in subsidized housing. We've also hired a community engagement and services coordinator, and she's focusing right now on conducting outreach to the public housing tenants, connecting with other service providers in the area, doing intakes and coordinating with the housing authority to review the tenant ledgers and tenant files. And perhaps most importantly, she's also assisting the tenants with applications for rental assistance from ACDS and other providers, and connecting tenants to financial counseling in order to supplement the legal work that we're doing. And so we're at the start of our project now and really heavy on outreach. We're hoping to reach as many of those 250 to 300 public housing households as possible. And I think that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Okay, I'm taking a look at the Q&A box. I don't see that there are any questions. Sometimes the questions get delayed. If you have an opportunity to stay on and keep your eye on the questions, that would be, or comments in the chat, that would be really helpful. I'm just seeing, but thank you for your presentation and for all of the work that you guys are doing. It's great. It's a great initiative. And we really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for the call as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, now we're going to move to Florida, and Cody Glazer from the Florida Housing Coalition is here with us. Cody?
Thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Cody Glazer. I'm the legal director of the Florida Housing Coalition, and we are a statewide training and technical assistance provider, primarily to local governments and nonprofit entities on best practices for affordable housing policy and development. So I have 3 brief updates to share on this call for this national audience. The first one being about the rollout of our state's emergency rental assistance programs here in Florida. Florida received around $1.4 billion in ERAP funds from the December allocation, which went to the state as well as 32 eligible local governments. And so of those 32 direct local government grantees, a little over 2/3 have begun accepting applications, with a majority of those programs launching in the last 2 weeks. And the big question mark right now for us at the state level is that the state has yet to start accepting applications for its $871 million allocation through the ERAP program. Our understanding is that the state program will not be launched until mid-May at the earliest. Basically, there was a time lag because the state decided to give the funds to a agency that wasn't involved with emergency rental assistance programs before, and so there's been a new learning curve to deal with this new round of funding. We are hopeful because the state did hire a good third-party vendor to administer the program statewide, but are just concerned that a mid-May launch is just so late in the process, especially for the hundreds of thousands of Floridians that do not live in one of those local government jurisdictions that got a direct allocation. The second update that I think may be interesting from a national perspective is that Florida, the legislature here is wrapping up our 2021 legislative session this week, and unfortunately voted to permanently reduce our state's affordable housing trust funds by over 50%, and then using those diverted funds to a new sea level rise resiliency program, as well as a septic to sewer program. And the reason why I'm bringing this up on a national call is that here in Florida, we've had some real issues getting across the role that federal funding plays in housing, which is really forcing us how to think about how to educate policymakers on the role of federal, state, and local funding. because in a lot of respects, the $1.4 billion in rental assistance and all the other federal funds that Florida has gotten in the last 6 months have made it harder for us to get full funding of our state-run affordable housing programs. So for example, for the ERAP program, as we all know, it can't be used for new construction. And yet policymakers saw this $1.4 billion amount that Florida was receiving in ERAP and used it as justification to cut our state-funded programs, which can be used for new construction of affordable housing. And so we're going to be rethinking about how to educate policymakers on the differences between federal, state, and local sources of funding, and helping policymakers really understand that not all housing funding sources are the same. And so if anyone wants to connect about best practices for educating policymakers and just the nuances of housing funding and how, not all funding can be used for the same thing, we really love to kick around some best practices there. The third update that I was asked to share about today has to do with a piece of legislation that was signed into law here in Florida last week that has been gaining some national attention, which is House Bill 1. And so if you're not familiar, this has been deemed the anti-riot or the anti-protest bill, depending on what side you're on of the issue. It has some real implications for civil rights and housing here in Florida. And this was a bill that was introduced in response to the George Floyd protests. And so in addition to increasing some penalties for persons convicted of assault or battery at protests, most importantly, I think for housing, is that the bill created some new offenses, which give law enforcement more tools to arrest individuals at protests. So without getting too much into the weeds, the bill now defines the term of a riot and what inciting a riot means. And so basically, if a protest turns disorderly or violent in some manner, House Bill 1 gives law enforcement more tools to arrest people just in the area to figure out later who exactly was responsible for rioting or starting the riot. House Bill 1 also establishes that it's a crime for a person to obstruct any public street or highway. So basically, people standing in the road could be arrested under this new provision and under House Bill 1. It also establishes a process where law enforcement agencies can actually petition to the state if a local government tries to reduce a municipality's police budget. So if a local government tries to reduce funding for the police, the jurisdiction can then appeal to the state, in which the governor and his cabinet can overturn local funding decisions for law enforcement agencies. Long story short, but basically the bill gives law enforcement more tools to arrest folks at protests, has different standards for if a local government wanted to reduce its police budget. And especially on the arrest side of things, as we all know, one arrest record can really harm someone's ability to obtain housing. So it's very troubling for the civil rights of folks who are trying to obtain housing, folks who are at protests. And we hope that this trend of this kind of legislation does not pick up in other states. That's my update. I'm glad I answered any questions and happy to be here today.
Great, thank you, Cody. Yeah, the House Bill 1 is getting a lot of attention, as it should, for the negative components that are in there. Really ridiculous. But in terms of your ERA program, there is a question here. Could you share who the third-party vendor is that Florida chose to implement its state ERA program, or is that something that you're not able to share?
Their name is Tidal Basin. I mean, they've been administering a lot of the vaccine programs around the state. They have a good relationship administering the vaccine programs, and so we're just hopeful that they are a good entity that can administer these funds statewide.
Okay, and they
track record.
It sounds like they're a Florida-only group, Tidal Basin.
Not sure actually, but
Okay.
they do have experience administering programs statewide for other things. So we're hopeful in that regard.
Okay, great. And there was another question here. What was the percentage that Florida's Housing Trust Fund was reduced by?
It was over 50%. It was a permanent reduction over 50%. So for example, this year with the current allocation, without the change, the trust funds could have seen $423 million in our affordable housing trust funds. With the change, now it's going to be $209 million. So it's a permanent cut of a little over 50%.
Great. And there are a couple of items in the chat saying what a horrible, horrible bill HB1 is. It absolutely is. And a note from Jerry Pohe saying, many thanks for providing providing leadership under horrific stress. We're with you, specifically naming you, Cody. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you joining us for today's call.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Okay, now we will turn to some updates from our own Sarah Sadian, the Vice President for Public Policy here at NLIHC, about both the American Jobs Plan and the FY22 budget. Sarah?
Great, thanks, Paul. So just a reminder for folks that we're very, very focused on this next American Jobs Plan, which is President Biden's proposal for an infrastructure and recovery package. We're continuing to push for our 3 top priorities. One is expanding rental assistance to every household. 2, providing $70 billion to repair public housing and make energy efficient upgrades. And at least third is at least $40 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund. We've seen a lot of steps forward in this proposal. As you know, the White House had put out their proposal for the infrastructure bill. It didn't include a ton of details, but we did see House Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Maxine Waters put out a bill that included 2 of those 3 priorities. So we need to continue to advocate for those as this moves forward. We saw last Friday that Senate Republicans released their counter proposal to Biden's American Jobs Plan. That Republican proposal is less than $600 billion, so far, far less than the president's $2 trillion package. That Republican proposal would only focus on roads, bridges, public transit, ports and waterways, airports, et cetera. There is no funding to address the affordable housing crisis or to repair public housing stock in America. So it's deeply inadequate, but it points a light to the fact that we need to continue with our advocacy. Many Republicans have said that that's just an opening bid for negotiations and that they're open to some changes, but most Democrats are just dismissing it outright, saying it's not nearly enough to meet the need. It's unclear right now whether or not an infrastructure bill, or at least pieces of it, could be passed with Republican support. We know that Biden has said that he wants to pay for the bill in part by putting higher taxes on higher income households and rolling back parts of the 2017 Republican-led tax bill, both of which are non-starters for Republican members. So it's unclear exactly what they could reach a bipartisan agreement on. But that being said, even if this was just a Democratic-only bill, we still know that getting the bill enacted is also going to be a challenge. This weekend, Senator Manchin spoke about the need to target resources just to quote-unquote traditional infrastructure. That's why it's really important for those of you on the call to continue to make the case for why these housing investments are infrastructure investments. Part of what we're doing is focusing on the fact that often the only way to build housing that's affordable to people with the lowest incomes is with federal support, because the private sector can't do it on its own. And that, these are brick and mortar investments that would help address the severe shortage of housing for people with the greatest needs. Our third proposal, or our third priority, rental assistance, that's a little bit more difficult to fit under the traditional confines of infrastructure, but it's still absolutely necessary. That we're making the point that without rental assistance, it's going to be impossible for the lowest income people to reach and benefit from the other investments that are being made in the bill. So please continue to keep up that message that housing is infrastructure and that rental assistance is needed to reach people who have the lowest incomes. Looking ahead to this week, we will see President Biden unveil the second phase of his two-part economic recovery plan in an address to Congress on Wednesday evening. This is his American Families Plan. It's a $1.5 trillion plan that's focused mostly on education, childcare, paid family leave. We do not expect housing resources to be included in the second part. So it's really important that we, as advocates, focus on the first part of the proposal, which is the American Jobs Plan. In terms of timing, we hear that Democrats still want to pass this bill in July, before August recess. And things are, to be honest, a little bit quiet right now on the Hill. There's a lot of groundwork that's happening, a lot of behind-the-scenes conversations among committees. And so this is the time where it's really important to be educating your members of Congress and talking to them about why these resources are important. If you have a Democrat, I'd encourage you to ask them to weigh in with key committees and leadership in support of the House priorities. So those key committees are the Appropriations Committees and the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. If you have a Republican, I think it's more important for you to focus on why these housing investments are needed and why we should think about this as infrastructure, just to get at that talking point that I mentioned earlier. We do have a national sign-on letter that I'm going to put into the chat box. If you or your organization haven't already signed on, I'm going to encourage you guys to do that. That helps us show Congress that there's really broad support for these investments. In addition to talking about the American Jobs Act, I did want to briefly mention a new bill from Senator Warren and Representative Emanuel Cleaver. They reintroduced the American Housing and Economic Mobility Act. Their press release went out last Friday. This is a bill that really helps address some of the underlying causes of the housing crisis. And so we think it's really important to lift it up as a model for how Congress should be engaging on this issue. The bill addresses the shortage of housing for people with the lowest incomes by investing $445 billion over 10 years, or about $45 billion annually, to build and preserve about 2 million homes, which is really just an unbelievable investment. It also provides $25 billion for the Capital Magnet Fund, $500 million in rural housing programs, $2.5 billion to build or rehabilitate homes in tribal areas, and it encourages local zoning reforms, helping to lower costs and increase the supply of housing. There's a great analysis from Mark Zandi that shows that if this bill were enacted, not only would you see that there'd be more housing for extremely low-income households, but it would lower rents for all renters or the typical renter by 10% across the board, because it would be really targeted to focusing on where there's a market failure. Beyond the investments that are in the bill also prohibits housing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, veteran status, and source of income. It makes it easier to use housing vouchers in neighborhoods with good performing schools, and it doubles the minimum requirement for accessible units that are built with the funds in the bill. So it means it helps to address the lack of accessible homes for people with disabilities as well. I'm going to include our new link to our fact sheet on the bill in the chat box, and encourage you guys to call your members of Congress and get them to co-sponsor that bill as well. And then finally, I want to leave you with a list of bills that the campaign supports. This is not an exhaustive list, but it is a great resource if you have questions or want to encourage your members of Congress to get involved in housing on other bills. We'll continue to update this throughout the year as new resources come out. So I'm going to put that in the chat. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Paul.
Great, Sarah. Thank you for that review. And actually, Jerry said, for your amazing breadth of knowledge and your gift of synoptic communication. And there are a couple of questions about Mark Zandi's analysis and whether we could share that. I'm just seeing if there's a way to share that as a link, that would be great. The analysis that shows that rents overall would be reduced by 10%.
Yeah, so I see in the chat box the link. It was published by the Urban Institute, so you'll see that there. It's a really interesting, cool analysis, and I think it drives home the point of why it's so important that Congress is using this American Jobs Plan to not just put a whole bunch of money into housing, but to really target it to where it's needed the most, because it benefits, like I said, not just the lowest income people, but all renters.
And I want to reiterate Sarah's comment that please, if you have not already signed the sign-on letter supporting the House campaign, please do so. We want to continue to accept signatories to that. And if you haven't already signed on, many of you I'm sure already have, your organizations have. They are organizational signatures, so please do so. Sarah, is there anything to share about the budget appropriations process at this point?
Yeah, I can give an update. We saw a skinny budget come out from the president a little while ago that provided a 15% increase to HUD programs. A lot of that came through an expansion of vouchers to an additional 200,000 households, which is really amazing. Congress is waiting for the president to put out his full budget request before they really get started on the next phase of the process. Right now, different committees are holding hearings on the budget request and doing some sort of laying the groundwork, but we don't expect to see bills marked up in committee until June, I believe. So this is a process that is sort of going to overlap with the work that we're doing around the American Jobs Plan. It's important that we keep our focus on both because both are really important opportunities to expand resources. I will say that we'll be in touch over the next couple of weeks, each week, and we can share more details about what is the most important thing for advocates to focus on.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And there is a question, how can we check to see if our organization has already signed on to the HoUSed campaign letter? Do we have a link to the letter with all the current signatories that could be shared? I'm asking NLIHC staff, if we have that, please drop that in.
If you go to the link that I shared, it should provide, no, it doesn't. No, I'm wrong. Sorry about that. We'll have to look into that, Paul.
All right, we'll find that and we'll make sure that we send it out as a link within the follow-up to this this call. I don't see any further questions, Sarah. Thank you very, very much, as always. Before we conclude, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware that we have a number of other more detailed working group calls that if you'd like more information and more sort of rolling up your sleeves to get into the details of various aspects of what we cover on this national call, we encourage you to join our policy legislative call on Tuesdays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a disaster housing recovery coalition call on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a call on state and local implementation of emergency rental assistance and other COVID response elements every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we have a special call webinar for low-income residents called Tenant Talk Live, which is the first Monday of every month. So the next one is next Monday on May 3rd. The topic of that will be the intersection of housing and environmental justice, and those take place at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So please join us for any and all of those calls, and please be sure to register to sign up for next week's national call. So that we will conclude this week's call. Thank you all very much for participating, and a special thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much.